kinds of great folks from all over the place.
Fabulous time.
It was a very good time.
A little bit of a Catholic family reunion for those here in the diocese.
It was. The deacon kind of blew me away because he had gone from Australia to Paris to Birmingham, was on his way to Texas.
Yeah.
Man said he does 250,000 miles a year. Can you imagine?
That's a lot.
It's a lot of miles. All in the service of the gospel.
Exactly. So calls are starting to come in. As you may know, things tend to get a little hot and heavy here on Fridays. So my recommendation is call now and get in the queue. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. So we're going to begin here with an email while we get some of these calls screened. Here is one from Garen regarding Jesus and the New Testament writers. Were they speaking to an audience only in their time, or is their message for all times?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Clearly, the Christ and the apostles spoke and wrote within a given historical context, and their language and the questions that they answer and the questions that they raise were raised within that historical context.
Sure.
Clearly, their words are also of perennial value.
Sure. So there it is.
You can't say anything that's not historically contextualized.
Both and.
You can't, every word you utter is uttered in a language in a social context.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that what you say can't endure or be of universal significance.
Oh, sure. How many people still quote the prodigal son, still talk about, the woman at the well and all these things?
Let me give a really trivial example.
Sure.
The Pythagorean Theorem.
Yes.
The Pythagorean Theorem works in geometry, whether you live in ancient Egypt or modern China.
Good point.
But it's the Pythagorean Theorem. It's not the Confucian Theorem or the Abraham Lincoln Theorem, right? It has a history and a context with ancient Greek geometry.
Yeah.
But it was of perennial value.
Garen, thank you so much for your email. Here's one now from Susan. My Lutheran husband thinks the Eucharist is the same in both traditions. It's just a difference in explanations of the real presence. So did any bishops break with Rome over the Lutheran doctrine? Also, do Lutheran pastors have any claim to confecting a valid Eucharist when they use the words of consecration as are used in the Catholic Mass?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So I would really strongly encourage you to actually consider the words of Luther himself regarding the difference in the Catholic Mass and the Lutheran communion, because Luther regarded the Mass, the rite of the Mass, as the greatest blasphemy and sacrilege. Those are his words.
Wow.
And he said it 10,000 times. There's nothing that he critiqued more directly, more frequently, and more vociferously than the Catholic sacrifice of the Mass. So as we understand what the Eucharist is, what its function and purpose is within the Church, there's more to the doctrine of the Eucharist than the doctrine of the real presence. Real presence is very important, but it's not the whole show. Why is there a real presence? Well, the Catholic Church says primarily so that the body and blood of Christ can be offered to God in sacrifice. Luther execrated, despised, detested, rejected that teaching with every ounce of his being. Read about it in his book on the Babylonian captivity of the Church. For example, Augsburg Confession. You name it. Pick a Lutheran writing. He talks about it. So he hated that doctrine. That's a big problem. Not the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, when it actually comes to the mode of Christ's presence in the Eucharist, there are also differences. The Catholic Church teaches that bread and wine become Christ's body and blood. Luther denies that. Luther believes that the bread and wine remain bread and wine and are accompanied by the substantial presence of Christ.
Which we would call consubstantiation, right?
Later theologians referred to that as consubstantiation. So there's a different explanation about how the presence of Christ occurs in the sacrament. And but the real substantive difference is over the rite itself. What is the meaning of the rite of the Mass? And Luther rejected vociferously the Catholic understanding of that.
All right. And that's where we're going to leave that. Susan, thank you so much for your email. If you'd like to send us an email for a future show, we'll be glad to stick that in the mailbag and then either answer it on the live show that we do every day, or we will tackle a whole bunch of emails in our next mailbag program. The address ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. As we mentioned, phones tend to heat up on Fridays. Today is no exception. In a moment, we'll be talking with Jonathan in Columbus, Ohio, listening there on St. Gabriel Radio. Also, Alba in Miami, Florida. 2 other lines being screened. 2 are open right now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. The Friday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
Hello, Journey Home family. Next time, we'll welcome Mark and Desiree Hausum to the program. Mark and Desiree are former Orthodox Presbyterians, and will share what led them to embrace the Catholic faith. Share the journey next time on EWTN's The Journey Home.
The Journey Home with Marcus Grodi is seen and heard around the world on EWTN. Join us Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern on EWTN radio and television.
Bishop Robert Barron.
I've been a priest for 31 years. It's a call to a total gift to Christ. It's a total gift of one's life to be conformed to Christ. And that's why I felt it when I was a young guy and I was kind of getting into religion and understanding it more deeply intellectually. It just began to hit me with a great clarity that if this is true, if God is real and God is a supreme good, well, why wouldn't I give my whole self to God? Why would I get distracted by anything else, Now, again, I'm not saying that should be true for every single person on the planet. That's the way it hit me when I was a young guy, was I want to give as much as I can, my whole self to Christ. So there's something heroic about that, where you do eschew a lot of things. You say no to a lot of things so you can say massively yes to Christ and to his demand. I think that's a heroic quality of it.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
Hey, if you love the great radio show Catholic Answers Live with Cy Kellett and Tim Staples and company, you can check it out on EWTN television. Check it out tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. Eastern, right on EWTN television. That's the TV version of Catholic Answers Live. It's a lot of fun to watch them execute the show. All right, if you're ready, let's get to the phones. Hit 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Jonathan in Columbus, Ohio, listening on the Blowtorch St. Gabriel Radio. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I just have I have 2 questions that kind of tie together. First of all, I'm under the impression that I've read that God is omnipresent, which means fully everywhere at every time. But I've also read that God exists in eternity and that heaven's in eternity. So my first question is, does God exist in eternity and in time, or just in eternity? And my other question that kind of ties into that is, if God is omnipresent, how is it different to go in a Catholic church and stand in front of the tabernacle or Eucharistic adoration? How is that present?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, Catholic Church teaches a number of things about the nature of God's presence. We not only teach the omnipresence of God, we teach the immensity of God. Let me draw a distinction. Omnipresence means God is everywhere. Immensity means all of God is at every specific location. Like 100% of God is present everywhere, always, such that there is not more of God in an elephant than in a mouse, if that makes sense. Right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why is God himself is not spatially located as if he were contained in a location, rather he himself contains all things. And so time is a creature. Time is a thing that is brought into existence and maintained in existence by God. Now, the physics and the metaphysics of that obviously is beyond the scope of this show, but it's interesting to understand that modern physics post-Einstein has helped us understand better the relational nature of time and its connection to space and motion, right? It's easier to see, I think, in light of modern physics, how time really is a creature in the same way that space is a thing, right? You can bend space. I mean, that's a bizarre concept. Space is not just an empty vacuum. It's something that's manipulable due to gravity and time and distance and various other factors, right? And all these things are creatures. And like all creatures are contingent. They don't possess within themselves their own raison d'etre. They don't exist of themselves, but they're maintained in existence by God, who is being itself. So he contains all things, but is contained by nothing. And in that way, whatever I lay my hand on, so to speak, put my hand on the coffee cup that's next to me, God in his immensity, as the ground and first cause of all things, is sustaining that in being, even as he is sustaining the creature time in being by his almighty power.
All right.
Now, how is God's immensity or omnipresence different from the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament? So the Blessed Sacrament is properly the sacrament of Christ's body and blood. Properly the sacrament of Christ's body and blood. Body and blood are physical realities. They are properties of a human being. Now, we know what a human being is. I got one. I'm one, and one's sitting across from me, Tom Price. Tom has body and blood. He's not omnipresent. Not omnipresent. Your body and blood are located. They're seating in that chair, and they're not in the other chair.
That's right.
Now, Christ's body and blood, when he was on earth, were not omnipresent. They were in the Holy Land. They were in Bethlehem or Nazareth or Caesarea Philippi or Jerusalem. They weren't everywhere. They were somewhere. And in the same way, the body and blood of the man, Jesus Christ, are not everywhere when they are distributed throughout the world by transubstantiation in consecrated hosts. They are located in the sacred species, the body and blood of the man Jesus Christ. Now, there's an interesting thing about Christ's body and blood. They're connected to his divinity and his human soul. And so where you have the body and blood of Christ, you also have the soul and divinity of Christ. Now, divinity is omnipresent.
Indeed.
But one of the proper attributes of body and blood is that they're not. And the sacrament is, properly speaking, the sacrament of Christ's body and blood, with soul and divinity along for the ride. So if I have the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, I have his substantial presence in a way that is distinct from the omnipresence of the divinity.
Okay. And we thank you so much for your call, Jonathan. Hope that clarifies it for you. That opens up a line for you now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion on this Friday afternoon here on EWTN. Let's go to Alba in Miami, Florida, listening on Sirius XM 130. Alba, what's on your mind today?
Hi, yes, I was wondering, if a person is divorced but hasn't gotten the annulment yet from the Catholic Church, and they're in a relationship with someone else, is it a desecration of the Eucharist to have Eucharist at Sunday Mass?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So we can receive Holy Communion in the Catholic Church if we are properly disposed. Properly disposed means that we are baptized Catholics who have either a no consciousness of mortal sin, or if we have consciousness of mortal sin, have been to sacramental confession and been absolved and done penance, and then have not consciously incurred any subsequent mortal sin. If that is our condition in the Catholic Church, then we can safely receive Holy Communion. If I am a Catholic and I am conscious of living in an adulterous relationship or in fornication, then I'm not properly disposed because I'm in adultery or fornication. And if I am conscious of adultery or fornication, the way I can go to communion safely is to go to confession and be absolved of my adultery or fornication. Now, in order to be absolved, I have to be contrite, to be sorry, recognizing that I'm in an objectively bad situation, and I have to have a purpose of amendment. I have to purpose not to continue in the state of sin. So if I go to the priest and I say, he says, what can I do for you? I say, well, I'd like to receive absolution because for the sin of adultery. And so he's going to assume, well, that means you intend to stop committing adultery. Is that right? Oh, no, Father, I'm going to commit adultery again tomorrow. Fully intend to commit adultery again tomorrow. Then I'm not going to be absolved. Not going to be absolved. So it really doesn't matter. The kind of the paperwork, if you will, isn't the substantive issue. The issue is, am I committing adultery? Do I intend to stop, or do I intend to continue committing adultery? That's what will determine my suitability to receive Holy Communion. Now, obviously, questions of divorce and annulment come into play because let's say the church regards me as presumptively married to woman A, woman number one, and I have civilly divorced woman number one, and I am now sleeping with woman number two and have not been validly married to her. Well, if I'm sleeping with somebody I'm not married to, that's adultery or fornication. The church would say, want to come to communion? Great, fantastic, love to have you. Stop sleeping with woman number two.
And go to confession.
And purpose not to take up cohabitating with somebody until you are in a position to validly marry.
That's
if you do that, you're good.
All right. Oh, but thank you so much for your call. Call to communion in progress here on EWTN. We're going now to Debbie in Plymouth, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Debbie, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I would like to say I am a Catholic, but as I mentioned to the screener, I'm actually dealing with someone who's a Hindu, and she actually lived in India for a number of years of her life, and she's now in her mid-40s, and she's very devout by all appearances, and she's willing to have a conversation about how she believes all gods are the same, versus I would love to share with her the truth of the Catholic Church, but I don't know how to best proceed with her because she's very firm in her beliefs, and she is a very good person.
Okay, thanks. So, one very popular god in the Hindu pantheon is Ganesha. Ganesha has the head of an elephant, and he rides on a mouse.
Wow.
The God of the Bible does not have the head of an elephant. He does not ride on a mouse.
Okay.
I could elaborate.
Yes.
And I can carry on. Now, you could say, well, look, I'm a Hindu and I don't really believe that there's a character named Ganesha who has the head of an elephant who rides on a mouse. I don't really think that. I think that's a superstition with an historical origin. And I think that if you study the history of Hindu philosophy, you'll come to realize that there are some monotheistic Hindu philosophers who believe that the superstitions of the masses are a kind of infantile stage in human religious evolution, moving people toward a more transcendent conception of the one God, creator and sustainer of the universe. Maybe we'll call him Ishvara, for example.
Okay.
The Lord. And that the proper way to relate to the God above all gods is through devotion, morality, sacrifice, rationality. Okay, now we're getting someplace. We're moving in the right direction. I'm not willing to concede we're exactly on the same page, but we're moving somewhere, right? So you see where I'm going, right? The God that the Catholics worship is the first principle of all reality, right? Who is ineffable, We can't know him in his essence because he transcends all created reality, is the source and ground and origin and sustainer of the whole created universe. And as such, he is identified with the ultimate good, because he's the source of all good, of all truth and all beauty. And we owe him rational worship, not the superstitious worship that pagans would offer to elephant gods. Not libations and sacrifices in the hopes of manipulating a whimsical deity to obtain earthly favors, but the sacrifice of heart and mind in the pursuit of virtue. If that's what you mean, and you think that all religions aim at that, well, I think that's historically not true. I don't think all religions aim at that kind of conception of God. And it's just a historical question, because there are religions out there that say, no, the way you worship God is you pour out ghee butter on a sacred linga, or you go slaughter people and capture their wives and sell them into slavery, and try to impose a juridical law, on civil society allegedly revealed in a cave. Or, you take multiple wives and move to Utah. I mean, there are a lot of different conceptions about how that God is to be, and they're not the same. They're not the same, because Christ says we worship God in spirit and in truth by coming to have the likeness and the mind of Christ exhibited in the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. Now, if you want to get on board with that, fine. But it's not evident to me that all religions get on board with that.
Yeah. Debbie, thank you so much for your call. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Sold out phones at the moment, so if you get a busy signal, do call us back. Let's go to Texas, one of my favorite countries, and talk with Roz in Dallas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Hey, Roz, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you? Yes, I have a question for Dr. Anders, which is, when did Jesus become self-aware of his own divinity?
Thanks. I appreciate the question. So the Catholic doctrine of God is that God is eternal. God is not caused. He is his own being and his own existence. And so God is also his own intellect. So he doesn't become aware. He is his own awareness, right? His property of being aware. It's not in him. It's not a property that emerges from his nature or essence. It is his essence or nature to be omnisciently aware of everything, including and preeminently himself. And God exists in three persons, three relations of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Son proceeding eternally from the Father, eternally knowing and loving the Father through the Holy Spirit. And so there's no time in the Godhead. God is eternally his own self-knowledge and self-love. Second person of the Trinity, the Son, assumes a human nature. That is the human nature of the man Jesus Christ. From the point of view of the Trinity, that assumption in time is an eternal event. Like God doesn't sit around thinking, one of these days I'm going to assume a human nature, because God doesn't experience the passage of time.
Right.
That human nature has a beginning in time in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. But the person of Jesus Christ in his consciousness, the consciousness of the God-man, is eternal. So the conceived nature, the human nature, knows from conception his own divinity.
From the get-go. All right. Roz, thank you so much for your call. Lots more straight ahead on the Friday edition of Call to Communion. Stay with us.
Al Cresta.
The secular press just doesn't get our story. They don't even understand it. And so it's incumbent upon us to get the story straight and get the story out.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Peter Kreeft calls envy the dumbest sin. Why? Well, think about it. Most sins make you feel good for at least a minute. Envy makes you feel instantly miserable. And most often, if someone suffers from envy or constant comparison, it's rooted in the lie that something is missing in you. When I was 3 years old, my parents asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I was shocked, dumbfounded. I looked at them like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I want to be a big one, Christopher." In other words, I want to be me when I grow up, just bigger than I am now. God doesn't want you to be somebody else. He wants you to be holy, which is to be fully you, fully alive. Not saint someone else, but saint insert your name here. He wants you to glorify Him in the way that only you can for all eternity. Start learning to love and appreciate what He's given you and what He's calling unrepeatable you to do. It's enough. Send us a message at connect@reallifecatholic.com. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Now, not only can you watch EWTN anywhere but anytime with EWTN On Demand. Get on-demand access to more than 12,000 EWTN programs, including live shows and specials, all in one place, all free. Just go to EWTN.com/on-demand. There's nothing to fill out, no memberships required, and no fees to pay. All you need is an internet connection, and you're good to go. EWTN On Demand. Fast, easy, and free.
Monday on More to Life, the couple that prays together.
We're going to help you overcome the challenges you face to having a more godly relationship.
Now back to Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
The Friday edition of Call to Communion in progress here on EWTN. A line or two open at the moment, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Father Michael now in Columbus, Ohio, listening on the Blowtorch AM 820, St. Gabriel Catholic Radio. Hey, Father Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hello, thank you very much. And Dr. Anders, a pleasure to see you. You are so knowledgeable, and I try to listen every day. You do such a great job.
Father, I'm going to have to stop you for a second. I appreciate the call. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Your phone signal is cutting in and out.
Yeah.
Is there a way you can, move around so that we can get a better signal?
Yes, let's try this.
Okay.
That's better.
Much better. Go right ahead, Father.
Okay, yes. Anyway, I enjoy your program, a wonderful job. But something a couple of weeks ago, you were talking on the Eucharist also, and the way you made the statement, I know it's not what you meant, but the way it came across, I had a question. And you were talking about being in the right stance, sacramentally and mentally and right with Christ before you receive the body and blood of Christ in communion. And your final statement was, well, if someone were to go and receive it, say if they, were not a Christian or not a Catholic or whatever and received it, it really wouldn't do them any good. And that not do them any good just hit me wrong. I almost went off the road. And I got back right away to try to ask you to maybe delve into that a little more, but it was too late in the day. So basically, that's why I was calling.
Okay, thanks. So I'm guided in this teaching by the Roman Catechism, the Catechism of the Council of Trent. And if I had been able to anticipate your call, I would have found chapter and verse so I could read it to you. And I'm not able to locate it on the fly right now, so this is from memory. But the Roman Catechism teaches that unworthy reception of communion is, and I'm pretty sure about this language, I think it says, it's very close to saying, the worst possible sacrilege. It's unbelievably strong language. All right, I may be misquoting, but the effect of it is that woe unto you, basically,
Don't do it.
for unworthy reception of Holy Communion. It's a very, very stark warning that to do this, and we're talking here about reception of Holy Communion when you're in the state of mortal sin, right? Is a horrific sacrilege, and so that's not safe.
No.
It's not safe. And, the pertinent biblical texts are 1 Corinthians 10, 1 Corinthians 11. 1 Corinthians 10, of course, St. Paul speaks, he says, the Israelites drank from the same spiritual drink and the same spiritual rock, which was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with them, and their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. And in this particular chapter, it's a warning against participating in the sacrifice of the Mass while being an idolater. And the analogy to Israel is that God killed them for it. And then when you move to 1 Corinthians 11, he talks specifically about unworthiness to receive communion because of greed, lust, and drunkenness, making one unworthy to receive. And he says that you will eat and drink your own condemnation. be guilty of the body and blood of Christ if you receive in this manner. And that's why the Council of Trent, the Roman Catechism of the Council of Trent regards sacrilegious communion as the worst possible kind of sacrilege and warns vociferously against it as a danger. So let me try to make sense of that prohibition, like theologically, in terms of the purposes of Holy Communion. And as you know, the Church teaches that, and the Catechism teaches, that the Eucharist is two things. It's a sacrifice and a sacrament. And as a sacrifice, it's not like the sacrifice of pagans, and it's not like the sacrifice of the ancient Israelites. And even as King David said in Psalm 51, he says, Lord, you don't desire the blood of goats and bulls, sacrifice and offerings you don't desire. Clean heart, pure heart, O Lord, you will not despise. Then I will offer sacrifice that will please you, right? It's the element of the gift, and in the Eucharist, it's the gift of Christ's body and blood, and the gift of our own lives accompanying it. That's why Paul says in Romans 12, we're to offer our bodies as living sacrifices. This is the worship in spirit and truth that Christ demands in John chapter 4, the latrikon logike, right? The worship in spirit and in truth. And so to have that converted, gracious interior disposition that's necessary for making not just the ritual act, but that interior gift of self that should properly accompany the Eucharistic sacrifice, obviously requires that one be in the state of grace. That's what the grace of the Church, that's what baptism is for, that's what confession is for, is to orient us in that way so that we might perform our primary duty, which is to love God above all things. And so, not in the state of grace, one doesn't do that. Not in the state of grace. One doesn't do that. Because to be in the state of grace means that we're loving God above all things and our neighbor as ourselves. The Eucharist is also there, right? So not only as a sacrifice, but as sacrament, right? That we might be joined to Christ. And in that way also, even as the ancient Israelites had to approach their altar of sacrifice with the utmost ritual purity, our reception of Christ's body and blood calls for us that interior purity. St. Paul says, 2 Corinthians 7, we're to purify ourselves of every defilement of flesh and spirit and put away the deeds of the flesh. He admonishes us over and over and over again. And those are the kinds of things that he raises in 1 Corinthians 11 as disqualifiers for safe reception of Holy Communion. And then finally, we have the sacrament as the bond and source of the unity of the Church. We who eat the one loaf are one body in Christ, Paul says, right? And that's why factions and jealousy and hatred as mortal sins are also contrary to the meaning of the Eucharist. Now, what happens if either in lust or faction or schism or jealousy or hatred or impurity I go to receive Holy Communion? Well, then I contradict the meaning of the sacrament in these three modes. And in receiving it, rather than receiving spiritual fruit, I'm actually searing my own conscience with respect to the seriousness of the call to holiness. And I'm thinking, and it doesn't matter that I'm angry, jealous, proud, lustful, bitter, factious, rebellious. These things don't matter because God in His benevolence will accept me by faith alone or by ritual action alone. That's why the Catechism of the Catholic Church in paragraph 2111 says that reception of the sacraments can itself constitute the sin of superstition. To go to Holy Communion without the proper disposition, and this is in not the Roman Catechism, but in the Catechism of John Paul II, paragraph 2111, says the act of receiving the sacraments in the Church can be superstitious if not accompanied by the proper disposition. Well, superstition is a sin against the first commandment.
Sure is. Father Michael, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate that. It is called to communion here on EWTN. 2 lines open at the moment, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go now to Francis in Portland, Oregon, listening on Mater Dei Radio, a first-time caller. Hello, Francis. What's on your mind today?
My question is from your talks. I've listened to you a lot of times, and my problem is I feel that there's no way I can receive the Eucharist. I'm not perfect in any way to be able to be perfect enough to receive the Eucharist.
Oh.
What can I do about that?
Oh, Francis. Oh, gosh, heavens. Perfection is not required. Perfection is the goal. The Eucharist is there to help us on our path to perfection. What is necessary to receive the Eucharist is forgiveness of sin.
Right.
Right. So every baby who leaves the baptismal font fulfills the divine command to love God and love neighbor, because that child has God's love in his heart or her heart through grace. Every soul that walks out of the confessional obeys the divine command to love God and love neighbor, because that soul has the love of God in his heart through grace. So what's left to be done at that point? This is the fun part. Here's what's left to be done. Even when we have grace, we retain the wounds of original sin and habits of life and mind that are destructive. Now, that habitual disposition is not sinful unless it bears fruit in action, either interior or exterior. So, like if I have the tendency, the habit to be drawn, for example, to excessive drink, but I don't excessively drink, I may have that habit, that disposition. I may walk past a bar and start to kind of quiver a little bit, right, and really want to go in, but that's not a sin. That's called a temptation. So what can I do in the life of holiness? Well, I can begin to purify myself of that attachment to drink.
Sure.
And so on with the other vices. And I'm going to stumble and fall along the way, sometimes small ways, sometimes big ways. That's why the sacrament of confession is there. But just because I'm conscious of weakness and brokenness in myself, that's a motive to go to Holy Communion, not a motive to stay away. The only thing that would make me stay away from Holy Communion is this. So let's say my particular sin is drunkenness, alcoholism, and I know that's a weakness of mine. Maybe I've been through detox, I've gotten clean, I'm 30 days clean, right? So the freedom of the will is operating here, maybe a little bit, but it's kicked into gear. Mm-hmm. And I'm conscious, and look, there are people maybe they're not conscious of this. So I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to the guy who says, I'm clean enough that I know I can stay clean if I do the right things. And then he's faced with a decision. I could go left or right. I'm under temptation, I'm under stress, I'm under work. I know, and only he would know this. I'm not, this would be his situation. Mm-hmm. I know if I call my sponsor or I call my spiritual director and say, I'm having a rough time, pray for me. That's all it'll take to help me stay on the wagon. But you know what? I just feel like getting off that wagon. And I decide to chunk my moral responsibility to my wife, my family, because I want to go have a drink. And it's a decision I'm making. Now, if you're somebody and it's not a decision, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking about the guy for whom it's a free decision. With his eyes wide open, he says, I'd rather get drunk, even though it hurts my wife, even though it hurts my kids, even though it hurts my job, my employer, or my God. I'd just rather do it. And he goes and does it. Now he's in mortal sin. Well, what does he do? He goes to confession the next day. Says, whew, fell off the wagon, don't want to do that again. Priest absolves him, back to communion. The fact that he still has the inclination to sin, not a barrier. Motive for going to Holy Communion. So I can grow, and the next time I won't fall off the wagon.
All right. And Francis, thank you so much for your call. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. This time last week I was traveling on behalf of Catholic Radio, trying to help raise some funds so that stations can stay on the air and keep broadcasting, and went into several churches and a cathedral on my route. And you know what? There I saw in the entrance some EWTN program guides. I saw some bumper stickers, all sorts of things like that. How did those get there? They got there by wonderful people called the EWTN Media Missionaries. These are great folks who prayerfully supply these items to churches, to even cathedrals. We supply those to the Media Missionaries. The Media Missionary actually places them in the church with, of course, the permission of the pastor. So if you would like to become a Media Missionary, we need you. Do give us a call, or even better, go to the website, EWTNmissionaries.com. EWTNmissionaries.com. Join us in sharing the eternal word with the world. Back to the phones right now. Here is Marie. Marie is listening in Champaign, Illinois on the EWTN app. Hey, Marie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I am curious about the church's teaching about pro-life and vaccines. I'm very pro-life, but I had a friend the other day inform me that she felt I do not have a right to be pro-life because I vaccinate my children. And I'm very torn on that because as a nurse and a parent, I feel like it's the most responsible thing for me to vaccinate my children. But I'm also very pro-life, and I do check the charts every year. And as of now, I know that the vaccines we have that are made from aborted fetal cell lines, we in America don't have access to alternatives.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So there is extensive discussion of this question at the National Catholic Bioethics Center, and I would encourage you to read that discussion because sometimes it can be a bit nuanced, and quite frankly, the science of the thing is beyond my competence. But when there are not good alternatives and the use of the vaccine is not a material or formal cooperation in the act of abortion, such vaccines are permissible to Catholics. There are some caveats, and for that I would, again, direct you to the National Catholic Bioethics Center. But in principle, because something is remotely connected to evil doesn't necessarily entail that involvement in that activity is itself a direct cooperation or intentional cooperation with evil.
Yeah. All right, Marie, thank you so much for that. Do check out the National Bioethics Center. They are a fantastic resource for all of us. Here now is Leslie in Cincinnati, listening on Sacred Heart Radio, AM 740. Hey, Leslie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. You guys are great.
Well, thank you.
How do I draw into a discussion with fallen away relatives? Discussion about God, religion, our Catholic faith, when they don't want to have any discussion about religion or God. They sort of fell away and they're happy with their life and they don't see any reason to get more involved. They'll tolerate me, praying over dinner and such. But I want to draw them into a discussion and they don't really want to. And Dr. Andrews, you inspired this question when you talked about a friend or a relative that you had and you couldn't talk to him for years, and eventually you said you popped a few questions to him, and now he's a strong Catholic.
Thanks. I appreciate the question. So all you can do is sow seed. It's all you can do, and you can be prudent. You can even be a little cunning about the seeds that you sow. In my judgment, this is just my personal judgment, if you are perceived as trying to entice to conversation with the end being proselytism, when they are dispositionally opposed to going there with you because they've expressed no openness to religion or the Catholic faith, and they think that you're baiting them, I mean, psychologically, they're going to feel manipulated, and they will be manipulated. Right? Yeah. That'll be what you're doing, right? And that generally is difficult to bring that to kind of fruition. So my recommendation is go as far afield from religion as you have to in order to find some area of genuine mutual goodwill and commonality. and relate on that, not necessarily with an eye to how can I turn this conversation to the Catholic Church, because again, then you'd be disingenuous, right? Then you'd be trying to manipulate, but rather, how can I engage this conversation in a way where we could actually come to some kind of mutual goodwill and agreement about something that matters? So, what might that mean? Well, if you're talking to a humanist who has no interest in the transcendent but has some interest in social ministry or social values, you could turn to cooperation in that sphere and seek to either discuss or perform some common good that you could both agree on, because it's a good worth doing, and then you let your Catholic life and faith flow into you in the pursuit of that good thing. Christ said, you don't hide your light under a bushel. I mean, the Catholic influence that you bring to bear on that question will be evident, and it might become a seed that could result in another conversation. So let me give you an example of how that might function. I can think of some university communities that I know of that need intellectual resources to engage questions of the civic common good. And so they reach out to experts on particular topics. And they just find themselves reaching out to Catholics, because Catholics were the ones that tended to have the competence in those areas. Because there were areas of ministry or intellectual engagement in which the Church's intellectual tradition was particularly valuable, and they just found themselves turning to Catholics because they needed to. They needed to get the job done. Well, lo and behold, then you've got Catholics operating in a space with non-Catholics in pursuit of some common goal, and eventually the non-Catholics realize it really is the Catholic faith that's making the Catholic contribution here intelligible. You see what I'm saying?
No,
and
sure.
then you're not offending people, and you're not manipulating them. Now, obviously, if they're Christians but not Catholics, you've got more room to operate. The closer they are to the Catholic faith at the beginning of the conversation, the more explicit you can make your engagement of the religion. But you find that point of commonality where you can work together.
Appreciate your call, Leslie. Here is Tom now in Clear Lake, Minnesota, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hello. My question is about the use of the words Catholic and Christian. I believe Catholics are Christian, so there's a distinction made that they're not. About 5 or 10 minutes ago, a priest had a question, Father Michael, and he referred to Catholics or Christians. And now, just hearing the doctor mention the same thing. So, can you help me out on that? Am I wrong?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. So the word Christian, of course, occurs in a number of places, well, a couple places in sacred scripture, especially the book of Acts, chapter 11. We read that the disciples are people who followed Christ, were called Christians first at Antioch. And so in the biblical usage, a Christian means somebody who's a follower of Christ. Now, if you follow Christ fully, you're going to listen to what Christ said. And Christ said that he came to found a church. He mentions the church a couple times.
Yep.
He tells St. Peter he's going to make Peter the head of the church, and he transmits a deposit of faith and a ritual to St. Peter and the apostles and commands them to perpetuate it until he comes again, and he promises them his divine assistance. Now, the mechanism for perpetuating that teaching and that ritual and receiving that divine assistance is the church that Christ intended to found. That happens to be the Catholic Church. The word Catholic means universal. Why universal? Because it's one church all throughout the entire world. It's not a bunch of distinct religious bodies. It's one body of faith. One faith, one Lord, one baptism, one governing structure, right? All the faithful united throughout the world. That's what makes it Catholic or universal. And that, although the word Catholic isn't used in the New Testament, the concept is the concept of a single body with one juridical structure under the leadership of the apostles guided by the Holy Spirit. It's clearly a biblical idea. That's what the word Catholic means. A person could intend to follow Christ and identify as a Christian and yet not understand fully what that entails. Not understand that following Christ necessarily involves him with that body of faithful and that governance and that ritual and that history. And so it's not inappropriate to distinguish those who want to follow Christ and understand that entails the Catholic Church from those who want to follow Christ and yet do not understand that entails the Catholic Church. And so that's why the Second Vatican Council was willing to concede the title Christian to our separated brethren, baptized people who possess most of the Bible and try to follow Jesus, but are not fully conscious of their obligation to participate in the full life of the Catholic Church.
Would a more precise terminology be Catholics and Protestants? Would that be more precise?
It would be different. I mean, Catholic and Christian are both precise terms. They name a distinct reality, but it's not, and the realities overlap. So all Catholics are Christians.
Yeah.
Not all Christians are Catholics.
Oh, okay, very good. We're going to go real super quick to Linda in Birmingham, Michigan. Linda, we've got about 20 seconds. What's your question?
Ooh, this is going to be too short, I think. I am a traditional cradle Catholic that wants to know the difference between the Greek Orthodox and Catholicism.
All right, in about 2 seconds, they don't obey the Pope. That's the short answer, right? They got a lot in common with us, but they don't obey the Pope. So we're working on that. We're getting there.
Praying for unity.
We're getting there.
Linda, thank you so much for your call. A couple of texts we couldn't get to. We'll hopefully get to those next week. Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
We do the program Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern here on EWTN with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern and a best-of show on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of our great team behind the glass here, Michael McCall, Ryan Penny, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. You have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you on Monday here on EWTN Radio's Call to Communion. God bless.
This is Colin Donovan. Open Line Friday is next on EWTN Radio.
You know what Catholic radio is? It's training for the troops. It's a inter-aural of the ear boot camp. The folks who listen, who grow in their faith, grow in charity, grow in all the virtues, they then go out and exert an